You may want to pull page 7 before someone important reads it. Claire Whitmore said it softly, almost politely, as she set the porcelain cup beside Ethan Caldwell's right hand. And for one impossible second, the entire private dining room forgot how to breathe. The silverware stopped moving. The low murmur of Manhattan money dissolved into silence. Even the rain against the tall windows seemed to hesitate. Ethan looked up slowly, the kind of slow that powerful men use when they want the room to remember who they are. 38, impeccably dressed. White shirt sharp as a threat, charcoal suit tailored within an inch of arrogance, a Swiss watch glinting beneath the warm amber light. He had spent the last 10 minutes controlling the table with the ease of a man who had never lost one. 3 investors, 1 corporate attorney, 1 vice president who laughed half a second too quickly at every joke. And now a waitress with a coffee tray and a calm voice that had just stepped directly into the center of his merger presentation. "Excuse me?" Ethan asked. He did not raise his voice. Men like Ethan Caldwell never needed to. Claire met his eyes without flinching. She was 27, blonde hair pinned neatly back, pale skin warmed by the restaurant's golden light, blue-gray eyes unreadable in the reflection of crystal and polished brass. Her uniform was simple, black apron, white blouse. Nothing about her should have mattered in a room like this, and yet somehow, she had just become the only thing anyone could see. "The debt rollover," she said, adjusting the sugar spoon by exactly half an inch. "It's hidden under the Shell acquisition. If they notice before dessert, this won't end well." One of the investors nearly dropped his fork. Another turned, instinctively, toward the leather folder in front of Ethan. The corporate attorney's face lost color so subtly most people would have missed it. Claire didn't. She noticed everything. She always had. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression cooling into something dangerously smooth. "I think," he said, glancing at the others before returning to her, "you may be confused about your role here." A faint laugh moved around the table, brittle and obedient. "Am I?" Claire asked. Not sharp, not emotional, just quiet enough to force people to lean in. Ethan's jaw tightened. 10 seconds earlier, he had mocked her for brushing too close to his documents. 5 seconds earlier, he had reminded her, in front of everyone, that the paperwork on the table was worth more than her annual salary. He had expected embarrassment, maybe silence. Instead, he got precision. Claire had only seen page 7 for less than 2 seconds while pouring Ethiopian roast into bone china. 2 seconds had been enough. The altered liability line, the familiar structure of a buried obligation, the shell company name that shouldn't have been there, Horizon Vale Holdings. She knew that name. She knew exactly what kind of men used names like that. "Claire?" the maitre d' whispered from across the room, panic flickering behind his professional smile. But Claire didn't move. Ethan didn't blink. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over Park Avenue, soft and distant. Inside, the room held still under the weight of something far more dangerous than weather. One of the investors reached for the folder. "Ethan," he said carefully, "what exactly is she talking about?" And just like that, the room no longer belonged to the CEO. No one touched the bread basket. No one reached for the wine. In a room built for confidence, hesitation had suddenly become the loudest sound. Daniel Mercer, the oldest investor at the table, slid the leather folder toward himself with the careful, measured movement of a man who had made billions by distrusting perfect presentations. His silver cuff links caught the chandelier light as he opened to page 7. Ethan Caldwell did not stop him. That was what unsettled everyone most. A man like Ethan always stopped people when he wanted control. But now he only watched Claire Whitmore, his gray eyes fixed on her as if the rest of the room had faded into wallpaper. "Claire," the maitre d' said again, this time lower, sharper, already crossing the marble floor with the urgent smile of a man trying to rescue his restaurant from a social disaster. "The kitchen needs you." She heard him. She simply did not obey right away. "Look at the footnote under projected integration savings," she said to Daniel, her voice still calm, still maddeningly even. "The liability is not gone. It is delayed. 12 months, maybe 18 if the regulators stay asleep. Daniel adjusted his glasses. The corporate attorney beside him, Richard Hale, leaned in fast enough to betray himself. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Across from them, Marissa Cole, a venture partner with a reputation for spotting weakness before markets did, narrowed her eyes and began reading in silence. Ethan finally spoke. That will be enough. It should have ended there. In any other room with any other woman it would have. But Claire had already seen the shift. The room had moved away from charm and into math. And once wealthy people smelled undisclosed risk, politeness died quickly. Daniel looked up first. Why is Horizon Veil carrying post-close exposure? He asked, not to Claire, but to Ethan. Marissa did not wait for an answer. And why is it tied to a debt instrument that does not appear anywhere in the executive summary? Richard Hale swallowed. Ethan folded his hands once on the table, elegant, controlled, almost bored. It was a good performance. Claire could tell it was a performance because his right thumb had gone still against his left index finger. That was the only tell, the only crack. Because, Ethan said, this is a preliminary structure. It is not finalized. Which is why internal drafts should not be interpreted by restaurant staff. The line was clean, smooth. It almost worked. Almost. Then Daniel turned one more page and found the handwritten correction in blue ink. The room changed again. This is not preliminary, he said quietly. This is prepared. Richard looked pale now. Ethan, if this was circulated without disclosure language, we have a problem. Ethan's gaze flicked to Claire, and this time there was no mockery left in it. Only calculation. Only the cold, immediate question of who she was and how much she knew. The maitre d' reached Claire's side and whispered through clenched teeth. Now. Claire gave the slightest nod and stepped back from the table. Not rushed, not apologetic, just composed. But before she turned away, she looked at Ethan one last time and said the one thing that made even Richard stop breathing. You did not hide it well, she said. You hid it where people only look when they trust you. Then she lifted the empty silver coffee pot and walked toward the service station as if she had merely finished refilling cups. Behind her, chairs shifted. Papers moved. Voices lowered. The private room that had belonged entirely to Ethan Caldwell 10 minutes ago now sounded like an emergency wrapped in expensive manners. Claire set the pot down in the kitchen pass, her hand steady, her heartbeat not. Are you out of your mind? Hissed Olivia, another server, staring at her from beside the espresso machine. Claire looked through the glass partition toward the dining room, where Ethan was still seated, still silent, still watching her like a man who had just realized the quietest person in the room knew exactly where to place the knife. Olivia kept staring at Claire as if she had just watched someone light a match inside a bank vault. The espresso machine hissed between them, steam rising in soft white ribbons, and beyond the glass partition the private dining room had become a theater of lowered voices and very expensive concern. Tell me you did not just do what I think you did? Olivia whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. Claire reached for a clean Demitas cup and set it on the counter with the same measured precision she used for everything. I corrected a number, she said. You detonated a lunch, Olivia shot back. Claire almost smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Through the window she could see Daniel Mercer leaning over page 7 again. His expression carved from old money and newer suspicion. Marissa Cole was already on her phone, one finger pressed to the screen, sending messages with the speed of someone who understood that a delay of even 60 seconds could cost millions. Richard Hale had gone rigid, the polished confidence of corporate law slipping beneath a thin sheen of panic. And Ethan Caldwell still had not moved. He sat at the head of the table, shoulders relaxed, posture flawless, face unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed him. They were still on Claire. He is looking at you, Olivia muttered. He is not looking at me, Claire replied. He is recalculating. That made Olivia blink. Before she could say another word, the maitre d', Vincent, came through the kitchen doors like a storm in an expensive suit. His polished shoes clicked hard against the black and white tile, and the entire back station went quiet. "Office," he said. No raised voice. No public scene. Somehow that made it worse. Claire wiped her hands on a folded linen towel and followed him past the dessert station, past the walk-in cooler, past the line cooks who pretended not to watch. Vincent's office was small, elegant, and designed to feel more important than it was. Dark wood desk, framed wine list, a brass lamp that cast soft gold across the paperwork stacked in perfect lines. He closed the door behind her and turned slowly. "Do you have any idea?" he said. "What kind of people are in that room?" Claire stood with her hands lightly folded in front of her apron. "Yes." "Then why would you insert yourself into a private financial discussion?" Vincent demanded. "Because it stopped being private when it became misleading." Vincent stared at her, as if the answer itself had offended him. "You are a server." "Tonight," Claire said. He let out a short breath and looked toward the frosted glass door, as if he could somehow see the damage spreading through the dining room. "Mr. Caldwell is one of our most valuable clients. He books the private room twice a month. His firm brings people here who spend more on one bottle of wine than most of my staff make in a week. If he walks out of here embarrassed, I do not just lose a reservation. I lose an ecosystem." Claire nodded once. "Then perhaps he should stop hiding liabilities in public." Vincent closed his eyes for a brief, exhausted second. "Who are you?" The question hung there, not angry now, just bewildered. Claire looked past him at the rain sliding down the narrow window beside the filing cabinet. Manhattan in late October always looked like a city trying not to show emotion. "Someone who has seen that structure before," she said quietly. Vincent was about to press harder when there was a knock at the door. 2 precise taps. He opened it halfway, and his expression changed instantly. It did not soften, tightened. Ethan Caldwell stood on the other side, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding the leather folder from the table. Up close, he looked even more composed than before, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "I need 5 minutes with your waitress," he said. Vincent forced a brittle smile. "Mr. Caldwell, I am sure this is all just a misunderstanding and we are handling it internally." Ethan did not look at Vincent. Not once. His gaze remained on Claire. "No," he said, his voice low and perfectly controlled. "You are not." Then he lifted the folder slightly, just enough for her to see page 7 still open beneath his thumb. "And if she is wrong," he added, "I would like to hear it from her directly." Claire met his eyes without moving. For the first time that night, she noticed something she had not expected. He was not offended anymore. He was interested, which, in men like Ethan Caldwell, was often far more dangerous. Vincent stepped aside because men like Ethan Caldwell did not wait for permission, and because somewhere in the polished machinery of high-end hospitality, everyone in the room understood the same rule. When power arrived at the door, you made space. Ethan entered the office with the leather folder tucked beneath his arm and closed the door behind him himself. A small gesture that somehow felt more deliberate than if he had left it open. The room became smaller instantly, not because he was loud, because he was not. Claire remained where she was, one hand resting lightly against the back of the chair in front of Vincent's desk. She did not sit. Ethan did not ask her to. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if trying to reconcile the woman in the white blouse and black apron with the sentence that had just broken the rhythm of a multimillion-dollar lunch. "You have 30 seconds, he said at last. "Explain exactly what you think you saw." Claire tilted her head a fraction. 30 seconds is not enough. For a bad merger. A strange silence followed that. Vincent looked as though he wanted to disappear into his own filing cabinet. Ethan's mouth did not smile, but something in his expression shifted. Not amusement. Recognition, perhaps. He set the folder on the desk and opened it to page 7, then turned it toward her. "Show me." Claire stepped closer. The paper smelled faintly of ink and expensive stationery. She did not touch it immediately. "Your projected synergies are overstated by at least 11%, she said. "Not because the model is wrong, Because the assumptions are. Ethan folded his arms. Go on. She pointed to a line buried in the lower section of the page. Horizon Veil is carrying deferred obligations through a shell layer. You move them outside the headline summary, but they come back post-close. That means the merged entity inherits the exposure after the lockup period. The debt does not disappear. It arrives late. Vincent looked from one of them to the other as if they had both begun speaking another language. Ethan did not blink. That is one interpretation. No, Claire said. It is the only honest one. The air in the office changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just enough for Vincent to shift his weight and look at the door, as though he suddenly regretted being inside the room. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who told you that name? Claire looked at him. No one. Then how do you know Horizon Veil? There it was. Not outrage. Not embarrassment. The real question. The one beneath everything else. Claire had expected it. Men like Ethan never cared how they looked for long. They cared how much had been seen. Because companies like that always sound clean, she said. That is usually the first warning sign. Ethan studied her face as if the answer itself was an insult. That is not enough. It was enough for me. You glanced at the page for 2 seconds. 1.8 maybe. Ethan stared at her. Vincent actually made a small sound in the back of his throat, halfway between disbelief and exhaustion. Claire finally touched the edge of the paper, sliding it half an inch so the light from the brass lamp caught the handwritten notation in blue ink. This correction, she said. It does not match the formatting of the rest of the draft. Different pressure on the pen. Different slant. It was added after legal review. Ethan's gaze flicked to the note. He knew she was right. Claire saw it before he spoke. And the valuation adjustment on page 9, she continued, only works if no one asks why the debt is absent from the summary but present in the subsidiary notes. Daniel Mercer asks questions. Marissa Cole asks harder ones. You should have hidden it from someone less disciplined. Ethan exhaled once through his nose, the closest thing to visible emotion he had shown all evening. Then, slowly, he closed the folder. You are either very observant, he said, or very dangerous. Claire met his eyes without a trace of fear. Those are not always different things. Outside the office, the muted hum of the restaurant continued as if nothing had changed. Glasses clinked. Plates moved. Rain tapped softly against the narrow window. But inside that small room, Ethan Caldwell had just realized the waitress in front of him was not guessing, not bluffing, and not impressed. And for the first time that night, he asked the question that actually mattered. What did you do before this? Claire did not answer right away. The question hung in Vincent's office like the scent of espresso after the cup was gone. Lingering, sharp, impossible to ignore. Ethan Caldwell stood across from her with the closed folder under one hand. His posture still controlled, still immaculate, but the room no longer belonged entirely to him. Not after that question. Not after the way he had asked it. What did you do before this? Not who are you? Not how dare you? Something in him had shifted from defense to curiosity, and Claire knew from experience that curiosity in powerful men could be more dangerous than anger. It meant they had started paying attention. Vincent cleared his throat softly, a nervous, practical sound. Mr. Caldwell, he began. Perhaps this conversation would be better handled another time, outside the restaurant and with... No, Ethan said, not looking at him. One word. Flat. Final. Vincent fell silent. Claire let her fingers rest lightly against the edge of the desk and looked at the rain on the window instead of the man in front of her. I read balance sheets, she said at last. Ethan's expression did not change. That is not an answer. It is the useful part. I am not asking for useful. I am asking for true. Claire finally looked at him again. There was no heat in her face. No defensiveness. Only that same quiet reserve that had unsettled him from the beginning. I worked in due diligence, she said. Vincent blinked. Ethan did not. Where? A boutique firm in Midtown. Name. Claire held his gaze for a beat too long, as if deciding whether he had earned even that much. Morrow and keen advisory. This time Ethan's stillness cracked. Not visibly to anyone who did not know what to look for. But Claire saw it. A brief pause. A slight narrowing around the eyes. The tiny recalibration of a man matching memory to present reality. Morrow and Keene, he repeated. They specialized in forensic review. They did. Past tense. Claire gave the faintest nod. They do not exist anymore. Vincent looked increasingly lost, like a man who had accidentally walked into a private language and could no longer find the exit. Ethan, however, had become very still again. Why does that name sound familiar? He asked, but it was not really directed at either of them. It was the kind of question brilliant men ask when their own memory has begun to threaten them. Claire knew the answer before he found it. She could see the moment he did. His jaw tightened. The Hanover Ridge collapse, he said quietly. 3 years ago. Claire said nothing. Ethan looked at her more carefully now, not as a server, not even as an interruption, but as a piece of history he had missed the first time. Morrow and Keene flagged the acquisition structure before the market fallout, he said. They issued an internal memo no one took seriously. Claire's face remained calm, but something colder moved behind her eyes. Someone took it seriously, she said. Just not soon enough. Ethan leaned forward slightly. You wrote that memo. Vincent actually inhaled. Claire did not confirm it with pride. She did not deny it with drama. She simply said, I helped build the review. Ethan stared at her, and now the silence between them had weight. Real weight. The kind built from recognition, from delayed understanding, from the sudden collapse of a convenient story. Claire Whitmore was no longer a waitress who had spoken out of turn. She was the woman who had seen a corporate failure before it happened and then vanished into the margins. Why are you here? Ethan asked, and for the first time that night the question sounded almost human. Claire looked down at her apron, at the faint coffee stain near the pocket, then back at him. Because truth is expensive, she said softly, and sometimes the only place left to carry it is where no one thinks to look. Before Ethan could answer, his phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. Once, then again, then a third time, urgent now. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and the controlled calm on his face sharpened into something colder. Marissa Cole, Daniel Mercer, Richard Hale. 3 missed calls in under 30 seconds. The room outside had stopped waiting. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket and picked up the folder. Stay here, he said. Claire's expression did not move. I do not take orders well from men hiding liabilities. Ethan looked at her for one long second, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower than before. Then do not mistake this for an order, Ms. Whitmore. He reached for the doorknob. Mistake it for the moment I decide whether you just saved my company or destroyed my afternoon. Then he opened the door and walked back toward the private dining room, carrying page 7 like it had suddenly become heavier than the rest of his empire. When Ethan Caldwell stepped back into the private dining room, the temperature of the table had changed. Not the actual air. The restaurant still held its polished warmth, amber light glowing over crystal glasses and white linen, rain sliding in silver lines down the windows that overlooked Park Avenue. But the emotional climate had dropped at least 20 degrees. Daniel Mercer was no longer pretending this was a lunch. Marissa Cole had moved her untouched base to the side and spread the merger documents open across the table like evidence. Richard Hale had removed his glasses, polished them once, and put them back on with the expression of a man trying to locate the exact moment a controlled risk had become a legal one. Ethan returned to his seat without hurry, set the folder down, and looked at each of them in turn. He did not sit immediately. He stood at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly on the chair back, the picture of composure. It was an excellent performance. It would have convinced almost anyone. But not Daniel, not Marissa, and certainly not Claire, who could see the room through the glass partition near the service station while pretending to align dessert spoons. Well? Daniel asked. No preamble, no social cushion. Ethan sat down at last. The structure needs revisiting, he said. It was a careful sentence. Corporate. sterile, designed to lose as little blood as possible. Marissa did not let him have that luxury. That is a polished way of saying the debt was buried, she said. Was it intentional? Ethan folded his hands once on the table. It was deferred, not buried. Richard Hale closed his eyes for half a second. Daniel leaned back, disappointment settling into the lines of his face. You brought us into a private review with incomplete disclosure. Preliminary disclosure, Ethan corrected. Do not play with language when the numbers already told the truth, Marissa said. Her voice was calm, but the calm of someone sharpening steel. Across the room, Claire lifted a tray she did not need and moved between tables that did not need her. She could feel Olivia watching from the bar station, feel Vincent pretending not to panic, feel half the staff trying not to look directly at the private room. But all of her attention stayed on Ethan. He was handling it well, too well. That meant he was still choosing his words instead of surrendering to the obvious. Who found it? Daniel asked suddenly. Ethan's gaze shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward the service station. That was enough. Marissa followed the glance and saw Claire through the glass. Her eyes narrowed. The waitress? She said, disbelief and fascination arriving together. Richard turned in his seat. Daniel did the same. 3 pairs of expensive eyes landed on the woman carrying a silver tray as if she were born to it. Claire did not look back right away. She set down a water glass at table 14, nodded once to an elderly couple, then turned with the same composed grace she had shown all night. She did not hurry. She did not perform. She simply became visible. Bring her here, Marissa said. Vincent took 1 step forward from the edge of the room, already pale. I do not think that would be appropriate, Miss Cole. Neither was this merger, Daniel replied. That ended the discussion. Vincent hesitated only a second longer, then crossed the floor toward Claire with the fragile expression of a man escorting a match toward dry timber. They want you back in the room, he murmured. Claire set the tray down. Of course they do. Olivia grabbed her wrist lightly before she could move. Claire, she whispered, eyes wide. If this goes badly. Claire gave her a small, steady look. It already went badly, she said. Now it gets honest. She walked back into the private dining room without changing her pace, without changing her breathing, without changing anything except the direction of her steps. Every conversation in the restaurant seemed to soften around her, as if the whole place understood that something unusual was happening and did not want to interrupt it. Ethan watched her approach. Daniel watched her with open curiosity. Marissa watched her like a puzzle she intended to solve before dessert. Richard watched her like a man reviewing his own career choices. Claire stopped beside the table, hands relaxed at her sides, shoulders straight, blue-gray eyes calm beneath the chandelier light. No one offered her a chair. She did not need one. Daniel spoke first. Ms. Whitmore, he said. Would you care to explain to the room exactly what our host hoped we would not notice? Claire did not reach for the documents. She did not lean over the table. She did not perform intelligence for the room. She simply looked at Daniel Mercer, then at Marissa Cole, then finally at Ethan Caldwell, who sat at the head of the table with his hands folded and his expression carefully neutral. If I explain it, she said softly, I would prefer to explain it accurately. Daniel slid the folder toward her. Please do. Claire rested her fingertips lightly on the edge of page 7. Not possessive, not hesitant, just precise. The private dining room had become so quiet that the soft jazz from the main restaurant now sounded strangely distant, like it belonged to another building entirely. The executive summary tells one story, she said. The subsidiary notes tell another. Marissa nodded once, already following. Richard Hale's jaw tightened. Ethan said nothing. Claire turned the page half an inch so the light hit the handwritten notation. This merger is being sold as a clean acquisition with near-term synergy and manageable exposure. But Horizon Vale is carrying deferred obligations through a shell layer. That means the liabilities are not eliminated. They are delayed. After close, once the lockup period ends, they return to the combined entity. Daniel's face hardened. In plain English, Claire looked at him. You are not buying growth, she said. You are buying a prettier version of someone else's debt. That landed. Marissa leaned back in her chair, not because she was relaxed, but because the answer had hit exactly where she feared it would. Richard Hale removed his glasses again, this time not bothering to hide his frustration. How large is the exposure? He asked. Claire did not answer immediately. She scanned the figures once more, lips parting just slightly as she recalculated. Ethan watched her with unnerving stillness. Conservatively, she said, between $80 and $90 million in the first 12 months, depending on how the obligations unwind and whether the market notices before the first earnings call. Daniel let out a slow breath. Marissa looked at Ethan. And you were going to call that manageable? Ethan's gaze remained on Claire. It is manageable if integrated correctly. It is manageable if disclosed correctly, Marissa replied. That is not the same thing. Claire moved to page 9. This valuation adjustment only works because the debt is absent from the headline model. Once the deferred obligations are reflected, the premium becomes harder to justify. Investors stop seeing a strategic acquisition. They start seeing a timing trick. Richard's voice came out lower than before. This should have been in the disclosure language. It should have been in the first 5 minutes, Daniel said. Claire straightened, hands leaving the folder. She had said enough. More than enough. The room now understood exactly what it needed to understand. And the most dangerous part of the evening was no longer the hidden debt. It was the fact that the person who exposed it was standing in a white blouse with a server's apron tied neatly at the waist. Ethan finally spoke. That is one interpretation of the structure. Claire turned to him fully. No, she said, and somehow her voice became even quieter. It is the interpretation your own legal team would have given if the note had been included before review. Richard looked at Ethan so sharply it almost answered the question for him. Marissa saw it too. Daniel definitely did. 3 experienced people watched one tiny reaction and found their conclusion. Was legal shown the handwritten adjustment? Daniel asked. Ethan did not respond immediately. It was not a long pause. But in rooms like this, half a second could cost a fortune. Richard's face changed first. I was not, he said. No one raised their voice. They did not need to. The sentence itself was loud enough. Marissa folded her hands slowly. So this was not incomplete, she said. It was selective. Claire could feel Vincent standing just outside the room, frozen in professional dread. She could feel Olivia watching from the service station, unable to pretend anymore. She could feel the entire restaurant bending around the private room, sensing gravity without understanding the math. Ethan looked at Claire, and for the first time all night, the armor in his expression showed a visible seam. Not panic, not shame, something more unsettling. Respect, arriving late and against his will. Who trained you? He asked quietly. Claire held his gaze unblinking. The kind of people who taught me that if a number has to hide, she said. It was never strong enough to stand in the light. And in the silence that followed, Daniel Mercer closed the folder, set both palms flat on the white linen, and said the words that changed the rest of the night. Then this deal stops here. No one argued with Daniel Mercer. Not because he was the richest man in the room, though he might have been. Not because his voice was loud, because it was not. But because men who had spent 40 years turning instinct into empires knew exactly when the air had changed. And it had changed. Completely. The white linen table that had been set for a polished, strategic lunch now looked like a crime scene made of paperwork and restraint. Marissa Cole leaned back in her chair and crossed one leg over the other, the movement smooth, deliberate, almost elegant. But her eyes stayed on Ethan Caldwell with the cold focus of someone who had just discovered the foundation beneath a beautiful building was not poured correctly. I agree, she said. This pauses now. Effective immediately. Richard Hale did not object. That said more than any speech could have. He gathered the documents nearest him and separated the pages with practiced fingers, already building a mental timeline, already calculating what had been shown, what had not, and what would need to be documented before sunrise. "I need every version of this draft," he said, his voice clipped now, all polish gone. "Every markup, every note, every internal review, including the handwritten changes." Ethan remained seated for one long beat, his hands still folded, his expression unreadable in the amber light. Then slowly he stood. The movement was controlled, almost graceful, but everyone in the room felt it. This was the moment, the one where powerful men either doubled down on pride or stepped into the truth and paid for it with their ego. Claire stood beside the table in silence, her posture unchanged, blue-gray eyes calm beneath the chandelier light. She had seen men choose both paths. She knew which one cost more. Ethan looked first at Daniel, then Marissa, then Richard, and finally he looked at Claire. There was no mockery left in his face now. No superiority, no polished cruelty, only a hard, difficult clarity. "The merger is paused," he said. No one moved. Not yet. It was not enough. He knew that too. "And Ms. Whitmore is correct," he added, the words sounding like they had to pass through something sharp on the way out. "The exposure should have been disclosed before this meeting." Daniel held his gaze, measuring not the sentence, but the man behind it. Marissa nodded once, accepting the correction without granting absolution. Richard exhaled and set his papers down, tension still visible in the line of his shoulders. Outside the private room, the restaurant seemed to collectively release a breath. Claire could feel it more than hear it, a small shift in energy. The strange relief that comes when truth, however inconvenient, is finally spoken aloud. Vincent stood near the entrance with his hands clasped too tightly in front of him, looking as if he had aged 3 years in 20 minutes. Olivia was pretending to refill water glasses at a nearby station while clearly missing every glass by an inch. "Good," Daniel said at last. "Then we are done here for tonight." Marissa rose from her chair, gathering her coat with one smooth motion. She paused beside Claire and looked at her directly for the first time. "You read all of that from a glance?" she asked. Claire gave the smallest nod. "Enough of it." Marissa's mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but into something close to respect. "That is either a gift or a very expensive education." "Sometimes both," Claire said. Marissa studied her for one beat longer, then slipped a card from the inside pocket of her blazer and set it on the table beside Claire's hand. No flourish, no speech, just a white rectangle with embossed lettering. "If you ever get tired of carrying trays," she said, "call me before someone less competent hires you." Then she walked out. Daniel followed more slowly, pausing only to give Ethan a look that said consequences would arrive in daylight. Richard left with the documents and the expression of a man who planned to work until dawn. Within seconds, the private room was no longer a negotiation. It was aftermath. The plates were half full, the wine untouched, the polished illusion broken cleanly in the middle. Claire reached for the nearest empty coffee cup because that was still her job, and because dignity often looked like doing the ordinary thing in an extraordinary moment. But before she could lift it, Ethan spoke. "Leave it." His voice was quiet now, different, not because he had softened, because he had stopped performing. Claire looked at him. The room was nearly empty. Rain moved down the windows in long silver lines. Somewhere in the main dining room, a piano version of an old standard drifted through the speakers. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said. Claire did not answer right away. She glanced at the cup in her hand, then back at the man who had mocked her less than an hour earlier and had just admitted, in front of the people who mattered most to him, that she had been right. "No," she said softly. "You owe me honesty. The apology is just cheaper." Ethan Caldwell had spent his entire adult life believing that control was the same thing as strength. It had built his company. It had sharpened his instincts. It had made rooms bend around him before he ever took his seat. But now, in the softened hush of the nearly empty private dining room, with the rain slipping down the windows and the remains of an abandoned deal cooling under chandelier light, he stood across from Claire Whitmore and realized there was a difference between commanding a room and deserving it. Claire set the empty coffee cup back onto the saucer with a soft porcelain click. Honesty, he repeated, as if testing whether the word still belonged in his vocabulary. That is what you think I owe you? Claire met his gaze. No, she said. That is what you owe everyone who sat at this table. Ethan looked down at the merger folder still resting near his place setting. Page 7 was hidden again beneath the stack, but the damage had already been done. Or maybe he thought the damage had been there long before tonight. Tonight had only been the first time someone refused to let it stay hidden. You think I built that structure to deceive them, he said. It was not defensive. Not exactly. Sounded more like a man, asking how much of himself had become visible. Claire picked up a folded napkin, smoothed it once, and set it beside the untouched wine glass. I think, she said carefully, you built it to buy time. There is a difference. But people with enough power start mistaking delay for innocence. The line landed harder than any accusation. Ethan gave a short, humorless breath that might have become a laugh in another life. You make a habit of saying expensive things in simple sentences. That is because complicated lies usually rely on simple people staying quiet. He looked at her for a long moment, then pulled out a chair. Sit. Claire did not move. That sounded like an order. Ethan nodded once. Old habit. He stepped back from the chair. Please. She studied him, the shift in tone, the effort it clearly cost him, and after a beat she sat down. Not because he asked, because she chose to. Ethan remained standing for a second longer, then sat across from her at the same table where he had dismissed her less than an hour earlier. The symmetry was not lost on either of them. The room felt different now, less like a battlefield, more like a confession booth built for executives. Morrow and Keene, he said quietly. I remember the name now. Claire said nothing. 3 years ago, half of Midtown acted like that collapse came out of nowhere. It did not. There was a memo, detailed, precise, uncomfortable. His eyes stayed on her. You wrote it. Claire folded her hands in her lap. I helped write it. And they ignored you. They ignored the numbers, she corrected. I was just the person standing next to them. Ethan looked away for the first time, toward the rain on the windows, toward the city that had made people like him believe they were untouchable as long as they were expensive enough. What happened after? He asked. Claire's expression did not change, but her voice softened in a way that made the answer heavier. The firm lost clients. The partners needed someone to absorb the embarrassment. I was young enough to blame and low enough to remove. Ethan's jaw tightened. That is why you left finance. That is why finance left me, she said. Silence settled. Between them, not awkward this time, just honest. From the main dining room came the faint clink of silverware and the low murmur of strangers returning to their own lives. Vincent was speaking to someone near the host stand in a voice that was trying very hard to sound normal. Somewhere in the kitchen, a dishwasher slammed shut. Ordinary sounds. Useful sounds. They made the moment feel real. Ethan reached into his inner jacket pocket and took out a card, heavier than standard stock, embossed in understated navy lettering. He placed it on the table between them, not pushed toward her, not offered like a prize, simply set there. Come work for me, he said. Claire looked at the card, then at him. That is fast. No, Ethan said, and for the first time all night, his voice held no performance at all. Fast was me mocking the smartest person in the room because she was carrying coffee. Claire held his gaze. The rain outside thickened, soft and silver against the glass. The city blurred. I am not interested in being rescued, she said. Good, Ethan replied. I am not offering rescue. He leaned back slightly, not to create distance, but to make space for the truth. I am offering accountability. Mine. And maybe, if you ever decide it is worth your time, a seat at a table that should have listened the first time. Claire let her fingers rest near the card without touching it. Then she stood, untied her apron slowly, and folded it once with the same care she had given every cup and every page all night. She set it on the back of the empty chair. If I ever sit at your table, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice quiet enough to make him listen harder. "It will not be because you noticed me." She picked up the card at last and slipped it into the pocket of her coat. "It will be because you finally learned to notice the truth." Ethan looked up at her, and something rare moved through his face. Not defeat, not admiration alone. Something deeper, the kind of respect that arrives only after pride has been forced to make room. Claire turned and walked toward the door, her steps calm, her posture straight, her reflection passing through amber light and rain-streaked glass. She had entered the room as a waitress. She left it as the standard he had failed to meet. And long after the door closed behind her, Ethan Caldwell remained seated beneath the chandelier, staring at the empty chair across from him, finally understanding that the quietest people were never the least powerful. They were simply the ones who did not need noise to be believed.